Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to virtually meet all of you. Just to give you a little background about who I am, I'm the Outreach and Consultation Coordinator at the Pace University Counseling Center on the New York City campus. I know all of you are students probably on the New York City campus. Our sister campus is Westchester, of course. I'm fairly new to the position, but I've been at Pace going on 4 years now, going from a part-time senior staff psychologist now to full-time. I'm also a New Yorker. I grew up in New York City. I'm from East Harlem. Just to orient myself to you all in your experience. So I'm a born and bred New Yorker as well. And parents are from the Caribbean, so came over, for their education, even though, St. Thomas is a United States territory, those parallels of sort of being an immigrant over here are very similar, being from the Caribbean. But just to give you a little background about who I am. And I really enjoy my work at Pace. I love working with the students there. I feel like everyone is, extremely talented and motivated. We as a center are extremely dedicated to developing our students and being a support for them, no matter where they're at, meeting them where they're at, and understanding that we're sort of in unprecedented times right now, around COVID and around all of the social unrest that is happening. And we as a center are very dedicated to social justice and wanting people to know that, we're open and available for all of those conversations and all of those discussions. I do have a little mini presentation just to give you sort of the concrete facts around the Counseling Center and the offerings there. So I will share my screen, bear with me, because as I said, technology is our friend, but I'm a little new, a little green to it. So just to give you a little sort of orientation to the center itself. Okay, so we're located on 156 William Street on the 8th floor. Now that is the physical building that we are located in. It's a medical building. And our hours of operation are from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If you do seek services at the Counseling Center, just to let you know, everything is confidential and anonymous, meaning if you come in seeking services, while we do have our procedures for screenings, that is completely sacred and private information, much like when you go to your medical doctor, that is your HIPAA information and, it's kept as such. All services that we do offer at the Counseling Center are free. So you don't have to worry about paying any sort of fees that go along with any of our services. Everything is free as long as you're an enrolled student. Any questions about that so far? And please stop me if you have a question or just a thought, please,
Well, let's save questions to the end and then we can hit y'all that way.
Perfect. So just to sort of put out like, what is counseling? Counseling is an interactive process. It's an active process. It's a cooperative effort between the student and the counselor. And really the purpose of counseling ultimately is to give the student the best experience that they can have for their lives, as far as I'm concerned. And we're there to provide support. So counseling, again, is a collaborative process. It's an interactive process. And, it takes sort of trust in the relationship that this can help the student sort of to progress to be the person that they hope to be, that we know that they can be. Some of the issues that we see at the Counseling Center, and we see really the full range and gamut of it, but pretty much students come when they have issues around adjusting to college life in general, because we know that in itself is a big undertaking, going from sort of your high school experience, maybe living with your parents and living in a whole nother place, country, to come over to New York. That in itself can be kind of jarring for a lot of students, even if in their fantasy, they're thinking this is going to be great. It may not be great, upon first arrival when they're transitioning. There are challenges that aren't always considered. We also deal with, of course, romantic relationships, you know, if you're seeking sort of partnership and, you know, challenges around that. Depression, anxiety, we definitely see a large presentation of students presenting with this. I think over the trajectory of the years that I've been there, we've definitely seen more of an influx of presentation around anxiety in particular. Suicidality, we have students that struggle with suicidal ideation, you know, thoughts of self-harm, behaviors around self-harm. Alcohol and drug abuse, which we know, you know, can be problematic, particularly on college campuses. Struggle sometimes around sort of harm reduction, and for people that don't necessarily want to stop using alcohol or drugs, but sort of figuring out help around that and what that could look like. Disordered eating, eating disorders like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and also just overall issues regarding family and home life. And I think that is particularly salient now, given that we are in a remote mode of learning. All of you are pretty much at this point maybe home with families, and those issues now have become a little bit more salient as students have made that transition back home because of the remote, because of COVID and having to switch to a remote modality. Overall, the goal of therapy and counseling is to help students to develop what we call their emotional intelligence. And what that means simply is sort of enabling them to express their range of emotions, sort of to understand your emotions, to label your emotions, and ultimately to sort of regulate your emotions. You know, it's hard to sort of make good decisions and make healthy decisions sometimes when you're dysregulated yourself, you know, when you're in a dysregulated state of being. So a lot of that is trying to expand the emotional intelligence and help students to sort of regulate their emotions so they can make better decisions. Now, how do students begin the process if they're interested in therapy, if they're interested in seeking services at the counseling center? Now, because of COVID, of course, and until we get otherwise indication, we do have a walk-in sort of hour and a half rather, which is between 1 o'clock and 2:30. And you can call us and that's pretty much how you would get in touch with us, calling us at 212-346-1526. That's the New York City campus. And you can request to speak to a call-in counselor. So if it's a more pressing issue, let's say if it's an emergency, you would be in touch with us either through, let's say, security, or if you're calling from home, if you need help right away, you can also call us at this number directly, and someone will be assigned to call you right back. And in that process, you'll get a scheduled appointment for a screening. And ultimately with a screening, it's a series of questions. They ask you just about your history, educational history, your presenting issues, sort of what you're looking for in the counseling center and how we can be helpful to you. And from there, we determine sort of what the services would be, what would be most appropriate. Would it be keeping you in the center for like short-term therapy, or would it be, you know, a long-term referral off campus if you're like in need of further treatment? So what services do we specifically offer at the counseling center? There are a few. We do offer individual counseling, we offer group counseling, and we offer psychiatric medication. Once for individual counseling, you'd be assigned a one-on-one counselor after you have completed the screening process. And again, you can determine with your counselor whether it would be sort of a short-term treatment, which could look like a few sessions, maybe half the semester, maybe the full semester. Typically, we don't go beyond 2 semesters for therapy. If there's a need for that, we would work closely with you to sort of find someone that you could work with long-term. Group counseling, we have 2 groups that run for the year. They're typically process groups with about 6 to 8 members. So, and they're usually closed groups. So once you have an established group that you're in, that group is no longer open to outsiders, and you begin your treatment with your little cohort of other group members. And those groups are run by our doctoral interns. They're typically for the whole duration of the semester, and all those groups are confidential. Again, we believe highly in confidentiality, keeping that sacred in the center. Groups are typically aimed around stress reduction, anxiety reduction, depressive symptom reduction, and also helping people around sort of socialization skills, because sometimes students do present with interpersonal difficulties, and the group is like the perfect place to sort of flesh those things out and get help in real time about what their experience is like, sort of managing that. Throughout the year, we also offer wellness programs. So we partner with other outreach organizations on campus, like the LGBTQ Center, the CAE, which is the Center for Academic Excellence. So we try to partner with other academic sort of institutions on campus to bring larger programs. We typically have a whole wellness week in the spring, and we have what we call Oktoberfest in the fall, which is about, again, alcohol use, harm reduction, and education around that. Also in our suite in the 156 Williams building on our floor is the Student Accessibility Services. So they used to be known as Student Disability Services, but now they've since changed their name. They provide accommodations around housing. They provide accommodations around academics. The thing about the Student Accessibility Services are you have to self-identify, whereas you may be used to the experience in high school where someone sort of, your parent or your caregiver may have taken you to for evaluations if you had difficulties around learning, or if you had learning differences, to get evaluated and to get accommodations. But at the university level, no one will do that, because again, your information is confidential. So if this is something that you have received in high school, we wouldn't know it. So you'd have to definitely self-identify to the center, let them know like, hey, I had an IEP, or hey, I had a 504, and these were my accommodations. And they can walk you through how you can provide additional documentation to get additional services and accommodations on campus. And that's always to help the students sort of progress and succeed academically. And housing is the same thing. If there's a medical reason or otherwise to seek housing accommodations, likewise, you'd have to substantiate that with documentation. So again, with SAS, you just have to sort of self-identify, call them up. They also have walk-in appointments. I think their walk-in appointments are 3 to 4 o'clock every day. Not sure if that's changed, but you can access this on our website as well. And they can help you with setting up sort of all of the things that you would need to get that documentation appointment started so that you can get your accommodation set up. How to reach us. You can either go to Pace Counseling NYC on Instagram or Pace Counsel NYC on Twitter. And I invite you to also visit our website, where they have various information on all the things that I covered, but they also have further updates on how we're managing through COVID, which I think is changing sort of as we get information from the governor and as we get information from the university. Things are updating as we get it too. So that, I think that's like the best place to locate the more cutting edge information about everything and about the Counseling Center. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions about anything I went over, please feel free to ask them, or any other, something else that may have came up for you. I invite you to ask.
Does anybody have any questions? Anyone? Okay, I have a couple questions if you don't mind.
Oh, no, not at all.
So can you explain, we talked to the students last week a bit about FERPA, and you mentioned HIPAA today. Yeah. What is the difference between HIPAA and FERPA?
I think for FERPA, if I'm not mistaken, that's more to education. Like your right to have your information as a student is confidential and protected, and again, not to be shared unless you explicitly give consent to share it. So there are laws in place that protect your information as a student from being shared with anyone. And HIPAA is sort of for your medical information, that it is your private health information that likewise, unless you give outright consent for it to be shared or disseminated, it's against the law. So I believe those are the differences between the two.
And I think if I'm correct, isn't the information for the counseling center kept separately from the medical records, I guess?
Oh, absolutely.
Kept separately from like the university records stuff and things.
Absolutely. None of this information goes into your educational records. None of it goes into your medical records. That information is confidential, is completely separate. No one would know that you visited the counseling center unless you gave us consent to share that information with whatever agencies that you deem appropriate. But absolutely, none of that goes into your academic record at all. And thank you for asking that question if I didn't make it clear.
No. HIPAA and FERPA are confusing.
Yes.
I think for a lot of people, so it's important. In my experience has been students often worry that if they go to counseling, everybody will know.
Oh, absolutely.
And other than if we say to you, go to counseling, I have no idea to know whether or not you went to counseling.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another question, and I'm asking this because these things come up a lot. Why is it important for a student, and you touched on student accessibility services, why should a student register for accessibility services, with accessibility services now rather than, in the middle of the semester? Why, or wait until they get there, or maybe their sophomore year, why do it now?
Okay, that's an excellent question too. And that answer has even changed within the last few months. Number one, if you are a student that is coming to the university with, let's say, already a diagnosis that you had when you were in high school, and then you have a right, you have a legal right to have accommodations put in place during the duration of your educational career. And that's something that you're entitled to. And it's important to get the process started as soon as possible and not to wait until you're sort of in a situation where, you're halfway through a semester and you're really struggling and you're having sort of more challenges, because your professor won't know. Your professor is not going to know this only unless you share it with them. And when you share this information and you get these accommodations, your professor can modify your work, can modify your time given to take exams, to hand in assignments. It makes all the difference in the world. And this is something that you are entitled to, and this is something that you are paying for. So I think it's really important for students, particularly students that have learning challenges. I have a son that has autism, and it, from a very young age, was very important to advocate for him and to continue to advocate throughout the duration of your educational career, because it's something that you have a right to. I'm going to say, in context of COVID, it is so much more important to get the process started now, because we have so many more students who are seeking accommodations because of what's happening around COVID and the challenges around remote learning and being immunocompromised, which we don't think about, but that's also another avenue that has to be considered now, not just sort of what's going on academically in the classroom, but what's going on physically with the body and trying to protect our health. And you have students that are seeking accommodations for that reason now. And they're coming in fast and furious at this point. So if this is something that you are considering, I would just say, reach out, make a screening appointment, even if you're not sure what you need, even if you're not sure of the process. It's important to ask questions and to sort of start the process as early as possible, because I would say now is the time. I would not wait. It'll just be more problematic in the long run and harder, because typically you need to get documents from service providers that you've been seeing. You need to go to your doctors. You may need to get an evaluation. We're talking time, we're talking money. So you want to position yourself to be successful in that as soon as possible.
And I'm going to throw in a couple things to add on to that. First is that it's important to understand that accessibility services, it's not limited to, and I think it's great you mentioned immunocompromised, but if you have anxiety disorders,
Yes.
those kind of things. And it's really a challenge for students. I've dealt with this far too often mid-semester. They're doing poorly academically because they have a learning disability. You can't apply accommodations retroactively.
You cannot. Excellent point. That's right.
So if you failed all your midterms, or even worse, you failed all your finals because you needed extra time, or you have anxiety issues, or whatever the situation may be, you can't come back to your professor and say, well, here are my accommodations. Please let me retake all my finals. Legally, they do not have to allow you to do that.
That is correct.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong with this, Dr. Benjamin, because this is another concern students have also often expressed to me. The accommodations do not detail what the accommodations are for. It simply says, Ken will need extra time on tests. Correct?
I'm not sure. You definitely have to speak to an accommodations coordinator on that specific language. Are you talking about in terms of in
terms of the letter the faculty member gets, it does not detail the reason for the accommodation.
As far as I know, in working in another university that I do teach, the accommodations letters I've received, I've never read anything like that. It just says what the accommodation is for. Yes, it would just say this person needs extended time. This person is entitled to having their work, modified, but never beyond that. I believe that is correct. Yes.
Right. And one other thing I'm going to throw in there, again, because this was a nightmare and when I mean nightmare, this young man experiences. If you are a student who's on medications and you decide to go off your medications, work with your doctor. Please don't come to school and say, Mom and Dad aren't monitoring me. I'm going to stop them.
Yes.
And can you explain why that's an issue, Dr. Benjamin? I've seen it, but you may want to explain to students why.
Yes. Well, first of all, and we do see that as well. It's an unsafe, I'm going to use the words, very clearly. It is unsafe to go on and off any medication without your doctor's knowledge and without your doctor sort of observing you doing this, particularly for students that are on things like antidepressants and antipsychotics, because that can definitely impact your health. It can also cause side effects. You can definitely, you're throwing yourself and your nervous system off balance. And more than that, no one would know sort of how to help you with that if you are sort of not taking your medication and you're not managing that. And it disrupts any kind of progress that you may have been making in therapy, in treatment, because you're no longer able, there's so much energy now being expended in keeping yourself regulated and in keeping yourself engaged in classes and engaged in your life, that even if you're in therapy, doing talk therapy, for example, and you're not medicated the way that you were, I feel like your resources are no longer available to you in the way that they were. So it's not a good idea to just go on and off medication and not do it under the guidance of your doctor by any means. It's not to say that you shouldn't engage your doctors in those conversations if you are considering either modifying your meds, titrating down off, or full on not being on them anymore, but it's definitely not a decision I think that should be made by yourself. Yeah.
Muted myself. One other question, and then maybe the students, if they hopefully have some. You mentioned that you're going to have walk-in hours, and I may be putting the COVID cart before the COVID horse. What will that look like in the fall, considering our social distancing situations?
I mean, there definitely be remote walk-in hours. What we want students to do would be to call us at our telephone number for the counseling center. Typically between 1 to 2:30 are our walk-in hours. But of course, if something comes up or if there's really an emergency and it's 9 o'clock, then by all means, please, give us a call then as well. But yeah, it will probably be phone in, get a screening appointment, and then that appointment would probably happen through telehealth, meaning like something like this, like a Zoom call where the client would be on the phone, not on the phone, I'm sorry, on the computer, and you would have your session with your screening clinician, and they would do your intake paperwork and then have a conversation with you about sort of what you're looking for in terms of treatment and sort of how to be most helpful, and whether that's, again, you being assigned to a counselor in the counseling center, or if you need more long-term services because let's say you need longer term treatment, more in-depth treatment, more specialized treatment, we work closely with you to find someone that would be a good fit, and then we would refer off campus. And even if you, let's say, get that good fit and you're still not satisfied, you can always come back to us and say, I don't think that was working. And again, we're more than happy to work with you again to find someone that you feel comfortable with.
And one other question, and I'm sorry, you brought this up, so it made me brought this to mind.
Sure.
Because we have lives, and unfortunately, life does not happen between the hours of 9 to 5.
Yes.
And sometimes, we may feel stressed or anxious outside of those hours. What can students do if they have concerns outside of hours?
Well, typically outside of those hours, there's always someone on call at the counseling center. Really for like emergency purposes, like if there's a crisis happening and the student cannot regulate themselves, there is someone always on call to receive those sorts of phone calls also. So we want you to know that we are available. But in terms of like trying to more so set up a structured treatment, that structured treatment with a therapeutic hour happens between the 9 to 5 hour.
Right. I meant if there's an emergency,
Oh, yeah. There's someone on call. Yeah, for sure.
And I will point out, because on the 4th floor, we have some grad students who are in psychology, and they always remind me of this. The McShane Center offers all PACE students free support. So you can go to McShane, yes, which is near PACE, where a lot of the graduate students work, and you will get counseling support there, yes, for free.
They're also another great resource. Absolutely.
So does anybody have questions? And I will shut up.
I also want to encourage students because, we talk about stigma also. And I feel like particularly for students of color, students that, where therapy may not have been something that was done in your home or something that, I have students now that are away that we've had to sort of stop treatment temporarily because it's hard for them to find quiet, confidential spaces and even in their own homes to do therapy. And that's a real issue. So we want you to understand that we are mindful of those things. We are mindful of the challenges in seeking therapy and that it can be an intimidating process for people. But we want you to know that we're here. We try to center our work in that understanding that we want to be available to you all in any way that we can be.
I have a question along those lines. If a student hasn't visited counseling before and is perhaps nervous or anxious or isn't sure what that first meeting is going to be like, what is that intake process in person or how it may differ virtually for a first-time student visiting the center?
Good question. So for a first-time student visiting, what it looked like in person was that student would come into the center, sit at a computer in a cubicle, answer confidential surveys by themselves. That paperwork would be retrieved by their assigned counselor. They would go to a private meeting room and they would talk through it. And then collaborate on what they thought would be sort of the best next step. And we would do something called a disposition, where we would take that person's case to our clinical team and say, hey, this student is presenting with such and such, and they are interested in counseling. Do we think that this is a case that we'll pick up, or do we think this person, or if the person expressed wanting to go off campus, that would be sort of documented, and we would make sure that we keep track of all of our students that come through. Now that we've shifted virtually, it will be the student will call, a counselor will respond, they will send out the paperwork to the student through email, I believe on the day of the screening, so that nothing is held over for a night before, just in case you have a student that maybe isn't a crisis and needs more immediate attention. We don't want to sort of hold on to paperwork longer than we have to. So that paperwork will go out the day of the screening. The student will be required to fill it out. The counselor on call will call them. They will go through the screening together, hear what the student is interested in, see what they're presenting with, and then either make the decision to keep the student in short-term therapy if that's what they desire, or again, refer them out for long-term treatment.
Chad, actually, I was going to answer that. And I think it's important for students to know that it's a process. If you walk in the first day, you won't sit down and,
Yeah.
Somebody's going to solve all your problems in a half hour.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is just a screening. But even in that screening, it can be incredibly therapeutic for some students who've said to me for the first time, I've never been in therapy. I've never sat in with a therapist before, or said any of the things I'm saying to you out loud. So even that experience can be really healing and powerful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benjamin. Is there anything else you think students should take away from this or should know? And then we'll probably take a break before the tutoring center comes in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, you all are doing like wonderful majors. I'm really impressed by, all of the variety that I saw in your introductions, and I just want you to know that we're here for you, even virtually, even if we can't be in person yet, we're still here for you virtually. And therapy is a beautiful tool that can really change your life and free up space in your life for bigger and better things, particularly if there are struggles around, not necessarily chronic mental illness, but just day-to-day stress, particularly around the pandemic, particularly around being at home, back in, in your community. There are things that people are dealing with that are very stressful right now. So I encourage you to avail yourself of services that, again, you're paying for, that are free and that are here for you. So I always just want to emphasize that.